May can very much be described as the calm before the storm. Hi, welcome, come on in. My name is Aoife, and today I am wrapping up everything that I read in May this year. I didn't want to go fully on board with the reading this month because I knew that June was coming. I knew that the Amazing Readathon was approaching and that I would need to be right in my reading mojo if I was going to have any kind of stab at it. So, in May, I only read 8 books, but I didn't DNF a single one of those. Of those 8 books, 3 were a physical book, 1 was an ebook, and I listened to 4 audiobooks, and all 8 were tailored to an adult audience. Across the month, I read 1,489 pages and listened to 54 hours worth of audiobook. For the genres, I read 1 contemporary, 1 historical fiction, 2 romance books, and 4 non-fiction books. For the star ratings, I do not give non-fiction a star rating because I don't feel it's fair to put a value on anybody's life or anybody's lived experience. So there were obviously 4 books that didn't get any rating at all, but there were 2 4.5 star books, 2 4-star books, and 1 3.5 star. The first book that I finished in May was I Don't Need Therapy and Other Lies I Tell Myself by Toni Lodge. Toni Lodge is an Australian radio producer and podcaster, and I know her really well from her podcast with her friend Ryan. I absolutely love the chemistry that the two of those have and the banter that they have, and I've seen so many reels and TikToks from them that when I heard that Toni had a book, I absolutely needed to read it. And I am so glad that I did because I really loved watching Toni's story about her growing up in a small town near Perth in Western Australia, moving to Melbourne to really give herself a chance at becoming a radio producer, something she had dreamed about for her entire life. And then seeing the realities of what working in radio is actually like. It's a lot of early mornings, it's a lot of long days, it's a lot of friends going out for drinks but you can't join because you have to wake up at 4 a.m. It's a lot of thankless and grueling hours in the office trying to get things done before everything goes to air. It sounds like a really, really tough job, and it sounds like something that you really have to be in the right mindset and have the right mind frame to be able to do. It's something that I don't think I would be able to do. So I am so in awe of her for doing it. Across the book, though, you also get insights to Toni's personal life and her family, particularly the story of her mother who passed away from cancer when Toni was about 13 years old. And you really see the impact that this has had on Toni's life as she had to grow up without her mother figure for much of her life, as there were so many things that she wanted to include her mother in and that she wanted to tell her. There is actually a particular chapter called Things I Wish I Could Tell My Mother, and it's so difficult not to read that with a dry eye. I listened to the audiobook of this and Toni narrates it personally, and she really does put so much energy and so much warmth into it. I really love when people tell their own stories and when authors narrate their own audiobooks, because you get to see what the story is authentically like as they wanted it to be told and as they wanted it to be listened. You can really see how close Toni and her family are. She's the youngest of 4 siblings, and you can see just how much they all love one another. Even though there is quite a large gap between Toni and the rest of her siblings, you can totally see how much they get along with each other and how much they gel. And I loved reading about someone growing up in the 90s and experiencing all of the same things that I did, even though she was 10,000 kilometers away from where I grew up. We are on completely different sides of the world, but our experiences and the things that we loved were so similar. It really does show you that the world is so full of people just like you. All you have to do is go out there and find them. Then I read Funny Story by Emily Henry, and this is Emily Henry's strongest book to date. I will full on put my hand up and say that I think this is her best one so far. Funny Story is about Daphne and Miles. They have been kind of thrown together as roommates because their prospective partners, Pete and Petra, were childhood friends who have now discovered that they have had long burning feelings for one another. In the midst of Peter and Petra's whirlwind romance, Daphne and Miles are left to pick up the pieces of their lives, put everything back together, and try to move on. They decide to live together because they know what the other is going through, and hopefully that is something that they can get the other through. But when Peter and Petra's wedding invitation comes through the postbox, they decide that they're going to have a little bit of a shenanigan of their own. They're going to pretend to Peter and Petra that they have been a couple and that they have completely hit it off together, but fake dating never stays fake for very long. Something that I definitely connected with in this book is how much Daphne feels like she doesn't have a life in the area that she is living now outside of her relationship. She moved to Waning Bay, which is in Michigan, to be with Peter as it's nearer to his family and his workplace, but she doesn't really feel like she belongs here. She doesn't have any roots that he has. She doesn't have any of the big friendship circle or connections that he had. So now that the relationship is over, she doesn't have anything that is keeping her here. She doesn't have that anchor that she used to have before. So now she's looking to spread her wings again. And you can definitely see this evolve throughout the book. She starts it off with saying 82 days until I can leave Waning Bay. And then it slowly starts to change. As Daphne's mentality starts to change, so do the chapter headings. It becomes 25 days until I have to leave Waning Bay, if I want to. 14 days until the readathon. Because something that I loved about this book is that running throughout the course of it is a readathon that is happening in the library where Daphne works. I absolutely loved watching them setting this up and organizing everything. And that's a big reason why I put this on my host favorites for the Amazing Readathon. Not just because I thought it was a really great book, but also I felt like there was something special about reading a book that featured a readathon while yourself taking part in a readathon. I thought it was such a quirky little thing that I just could not miss it out. But I do definitely understand how Daphne feels like, I don't have a life here anymore. This isn't the place for me anymore. But I also loved watching her really put herself into the town. She starts to make new friends. She starts to go out a bit more. She starts to go to things that she had never been going to, even though she'd been living in the area for about 2 years by the end of the book. I really loved watching her actually put herself out there and overcome all of the fears and all of the anxiety that she had. The main male character in this book, Miles Novak, is so Nick Miller coded. If you have watched New Girl and if Nick is one of your favorite characters, I have a feeling you're going to absolutely adore this book. The first time that we meet Miles, he is sitting in his room crying and listening to Celine Dion songs. There is nothing more Nick Miller in this world than a man who is sitting with a bunch of tissues around him, crying his eyes out and listening to All By Myself. I genuinely fell in love with him so much. And to confirm the Nick Miller stereotype, Miles is a bartender and you get to see him working behind the bar and you get to see him interacting with the customers, and it's so exciting to see one of your favorite characters immortalized in the pages of a book. Then I read Strong Female Character by Fern Brady. This was one of the 2 celebrity memoirs that I read, and I absolutely loved this one. Fern Brady is a Scottish comedian, and I have seen her around on a couple of things. I've seen her on Russell Howard's Good News, I have seen her on Live at the Apollo, but one of the biggest places that I've seen her recently is on Taskmaster. I think she was on season 14 or so, and she fit in like a glove. Something that she says in this book is actually that Taskmaster is the most autism-coded show she's ever been on. And you can tell how important that was for her and how much it meant to her, because Fern was diagnosed with autism as an adult. A lot of this book is then going back towards her childhood and looking at the entirety of her life and thinking, this would have made so much more sense if I had had that diagnosis a little bit earlier in my life. If I had already known going into it that my brain works a little different to everyone else's in the world, that I see things so differently than how others would see it. It's such a great book. I am neurotypical, but I really appreciated this book because it gave me a further idea and so much more of an understanding as to my friends who are neurodivergent and the things that can trip them up a little bit, but to me seem really straightforward, and the things that they might need a little bit more time to develop on and they might need a little bit more time to think through, whereas for me the answer might seem completely straightforward. Something that I could sympathize with Fern definitely from, and having lived through this point of view though, is Fern having Irish Catholic parents. I also have Irish Catholic parents who never left Ireland, whereas Fern's parents are Scottish. She had a very Catholic upbringing, and there is a very specific subset of the world who has that strong Catholic upbringing, and the shape that it can make on your life and the things that it can make you think or do or feel. You will always have that little bit of Catholic guilt around you, no matter what you are doing, no matter how removed from the church you find yourself. There will always be that little voice in the middle of your head. Reading about Fern's rather tumultuous relationship with her parents, it was very up and down depending on her mood for the day or their moods for the day. It was completely heartbreaking. I do have a pretty good relationship with my parents, and I'm really lucky that I do have that. But There were a lot of the times in this book where you could truly sense Fern was just trying to understand what was happening. She was just trying to make a connection with these two people, and it just wasn't going the way any of them had planned to. This book also heavily features footnotes, which will explain some of the terms that you might not be familiar with in the book, or it will cite some of the sources where the information has come from. I really valued those. They were such a hive of information, but I will say that I read the ebook of this and I found them to be a little bit clunky when I was using my Kindle. It was really difficult to actually press onto them because they were so tiny asterisked that it just felt a little bit clunky and a little bit difficult to actually click into the footnotes themselves. I found them to not be super accessible because the font was so small and so bunched together with what had actually been posted already. I think it just could have worked around a little bit better that way. The book also has really great representation of sex workers and what the life of a sex worker is actually like. Fern used to work as a stripper when she had just graduated college to try and get some money for herself. And you can really see the depiction of it as such a realistic one and a really eye-opening one. It is in no way like the world of the strippers that we have seen on TV or in movies. It's a completely nitty-gritty world, and it's very cutthroat, and it's very everyone is against everyone else. And I thought that that was such an eye-opening, kind of worldview changing way for me to read that, because it truly opened my eyes to what the world of sex work is actually like in comparison to how we might have seen it on TV. This was one of my favorite memoirs that I have read in such a long time, and I would absolutely recommend it to any person. Whether they are neurodivergent or not, you will absolutely take something away from this book. Then I read Glutton by Ed Gamble, and my brother had already read this, and he gave me a one-line review. This is a book you can tell was written by Ed Gamble, and you absolutely can. Ed Gamble is another really great comedian in the UK, and I absolutely love his comedy. I love his delivery. I love his off-menu food podcast that he does with James Acaster, one of his close friends. And this book is so heavily about food. If you have any struggles with food, eating, diets, I would definitely avoid this book because it can be a little bit triggering at times, how much he's talking about weight loss, how much he's talking about food content, but it's such a great read. Ed is type 1 diabetic, so you do find out a little bit about the life of a type 1 diabetic person in this book, and that was something that I really took value from. I have a couple of people in my life who are type 1 diabetic, and he also talks about what life is like when you have to suffer through a diabetic kind of a slump while you are on stage. It's something that has happened to him before, and it's something that he was worried would happen before, and it so well deals with what that was like for him, how kind of terrifying it was, and how he basically tried to overcome it. He also talks about the kind of division between type 1 and type 2 diabetics, and the kind of gentle ribbing that happens in the community, but also a little bit of a look back as to how he was kind of prejudiced against type 2 diabetic people, and how he has completely changed his mindset about that. Another thing that comes up in Ed's life quite often is that he used to be heavily overweight. He used to have absolutely no control when it came to food, and he had said that himself in the book. There was even a day where he had eaten 4 whole full-size pizzas straight by himself in one turn. And you can almost see that that was like the switch that flicked in his brain, where he was like, I need to keep better control out of this. I need to watch a little bit more about what I'm eating. Especially from a health point of view as a diabetic, you can definitely tell it was having a strain on his physical and emotional well-being. And he also goes through how it was that he lost so much weight and the responses that he had gotten from people who would have known him for years and had never expected him to be able to lose all of the weight that he did. The diet talk is a little bit heavy in a couple of chapters, so there are a couple of chapters that you should skip if diet talk is something that will not sit well with you at the moment. But overall, I found it to be a really great book. He does talk a little bit about his love for cooking, and he has a really great lasagna recipe about 3/4 of the way through the book that if I wasn't so closely married to my own recipe, I would absolutely give it a try. But I have taken one tip from it, and it is to leave your lasagna standing for about 10 to 15 minutes after it has come out of the oven, just to let everything settle for a little bit and to let the flavors kind of seep in. It sounds like a really great tip, and the next time that I make a lasagna, I'm definitely going to try it out. He also talks so wonderfully about his relationship with his now wife, his girlfriend at the time of writing the book, Charlie, how they had met each other, and how it almost felt like, as a former fat boy, as he calls himself, he never would have found somebody who could love and trust and respect him in the way that his wife does, and how vulnerable it was for him to open up to that. There is such a beautiful chapter that he speaks about when they got engaged and the love that he has for her. I truly love their relationship. They really seem to have a really great relationship from what they've shared on social media together, and I love being a little kind of fly on the wall for that section. If you know Ed Gamble, if you're familiar with his work, you'll know that he can be a little pretentious at times, and that definitely does come through as well. He's the kind of person that when he would go out for dinner with friends as a kid, he wouldn't go for like the sausage and chips or the chicken nugget and chips option. He would ask for foie gras and steamed salmon every single time. And I really loved reading about somebody who has such a refined palate, and somebody who doesn't really buy into the whole idea of children should only be fed these like really bland foods, try and expand their palates a little bit. I thought that that was such an interesting chapter to read. Then I hit the most minuscule of reading slump, so I had to do a little bit of rereading to get myself back on track. And I went first with Everything I Never Told You by Celeste Ng. Kind of a little bit of a tough one to start with the rereading, but I had a really great time with this one. It is about the Lee family who live in a small town in Ohio, and they wake up one morning without the knowledge that their middle daughter Lydia is dead in the local pond. Throughout the book, you flash back to before Lydia died, and you also see what the repercussions of Lydia's death has had on the family. And you also learn that things were not as they seem between James and Marilyn, who are Lydia's parents. James had been having an affair with his teaching assistant, and Marilyn has always been a little bit resentful of the life that she has now. You can definitely tell that she feels a little bit kind of directionless, and that she almost wishes that she could go back down the path that she initially wanted to go down. Marilyn, between the birth of Lydia and her younger sister Hannah, had escaped to, I think it was Kansas, in order to go back to university, become a university professor, and to really nurture her love of science. But as she discovered that she was carrying their third child, Marilyn comes back to the family home, and life goes on as it was. Nath, who is Lydia's older brother, is obsessed with space and with astronomy and has huge desires to be an astronaut. He wants to go to Harvard to study physics, but things don't always work out as they had planned, and the weekend that Lydia passes away, he was actually supposed to be in Harvard, doing a kind of tour of the campus and figuring out what everything was, and if he wanted to go to Harvard or not. A running theme throughout this book is racism and the us against them, or the I'm better than you, or the you are better than me mentality. James is a Chinese American, and his family have just recently immigrated to America, whereas Marilyn is white. Her mother is not particularly welcoming to anybody from other areas of the world, and when James and Marilyn marry each other, this is the last time that she will ever see her mother. You can absolutely see the kind of mentality that people had during the 1950s and the 1970s in America. There is all this kind of discussion about how Lydia is a really interesting person because she is Chinese, but her eyes are the deepest blue of the ocean, that it's entrancing to people. You can also see that there is a huge connection between James and his teaching assistant Louisa, because she is also Chinese American, and they just have that little connection with each other because of their background. I thought it was such an interesting topic to touch on, and I thought it was written so beautifully as well. This was the first book of Celeste Ng's that I've read. I also have got copies of Little Fires Everywhere, and I know that Our Missing Hearts is such a great read. I definitely want to go and check those out soon. I know that Little Fires Everywhere has got an adaptation, so it's one that I am definitely going to have to read so that I can go and get watching. My second reread of May was The Flatshare by Beth O'Leary, and I think I enjoyed this book even more the second time that I read it. It is about Tiffy and Leon, who live together in the same apartment and they share a bed, but they are never really in it at the same time. Tiffy works a regular 9-to-5 job, whereas Leon works as a nurse in a hospice, and he is genuinely only in the apartment between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. when Tiffy is out for work. He has such a strange working schedule that this was the best way for them to both find somewhere to live in London, which wasn't going to completely deplete their bank account after payday. Leon is also very heavily focused on his brother Richie, who is in jail at the moment for having been wrongly accused of an assault while he was on a night out. And one of Leon's biggest things that he is concerned about at the moment is getting Richie back out there. He has been searching for a lawyer for ages. He has been searching for somebody who will take on the case pro bono. And he is basically shit out of luck until Tiffy walks through his front door. One of Tiffy's best friends, Gertie, is a lawyer, agrees to take his case on pro bono, and quite a lot of the book involves Richie calling the flat while Leon isn't home, getting to know Tiffy a little bit better, and sensing that there is definitely a spark between the two. Something that I loved about this book, and it is so simple, is that Leon was narrated by an Irish person. Leon is canonically Irish, but the Flatshare adaptation that was on Paramount maybe last year or so, Brit-washed him. And it is for that reason, and for that reason alone, that I never want to watch the series, because if you cannot stay true to the book, and also if you're going to take a character who's Irish and make them British, am I really going to be okay with that? Something else that is quite prevalent in this book, and something that you might want to be aware of, is that Tiffy has just come out of an emotionally abusive relationship, and her ex-boyfriend Justin is still quite heavily trying to gaslight her. He will somehow turn up at all of the events that she has been at for work. He will somehow turn up at things that she just found out that she was going to this day. He will somehow be there at things that she kind of last minute planned to be at, but he will just be lurking in the background, or he will come up and speak to her when she is completely not expecting to be there at all. You can definitely see that it's having an impact on her mental health. You can definitely see that it's having an impact on her ability to move forward with her life. And when we found out the reason that he has always been there, it definitely made me a little bit more wary about the world that we're living in and about the company that people can keep. One thing that I didn't particularly like about this book was the third act conflict. It is mainly a contemporary book, but there is a small romance that kind of flows through the book. And the third act conflict that happened between Tiffy and Leon, I felt like it was so easily avoidable. It felt really unrealistic to what the characters would have known about each other. It felt completely over the top for the reason that it was started in the first place. I kind of rolled my eyes so far back into my head that I could see the back of my skull while I was reading it. It just didn't make sense for the rest of the book. It felt like it was purely crafted just to bring in as much drama as possible, but it could have been done in a much better way. The final book that I read in May was How to Get the Girl by Anita Kelly. I had read Anita's debut, Love and Other Disasters, and I fell in love with it. Then I read their second book, Something Wild and Wonderful, and I DNF'd it pretty early into the book. I don't know if it was because the timing was wrong for me. I don't know if I just couldn't get on board with the characters, but there was just something missing for that one. Thankfully, this is definitely a return to form. It is following Elle and Julie. Julie is the coach of the local high school's basketball team. She is also a teacher working in the school. And Elle has just recently moved into the town. She's the foster parent for her cousin's daughter, as her cousin is going through some things at the moment and is basically in rehab to try and sort her life out and get her life back on track. Elle, however, used to be huge in the WNBA, and she has got a huge following anywhere that she goes. When she discovers that the local high school has a basketball team, she is kind of roped in to help to coach them and to give them some support. And that is how she meets Julie. I really loved that this book had them be friends first. I loved that the relationship started as a friendship, got a chance to develop into something more, but it felt so much more natural. I hate an insta love story. I hate when they just clap eyes on one another and that's it. You can hear violins and you can see Cupid's arrow. I really love there to be some kind of development. I really want to watch them actually fall for one another. So that was definitely something that I got here, and it was done so well. It was a little bit slow burn, but I think in this book it really worked. Something else that I loved about the book was the journeys that the two women had gone on personally. Elle is very closed off at the start of this book. She's very much I can do it by myself. I do not need any help from anyone else. But as the story progresses, you can really see her starting to open up, letting people in, accepting help when she knows that she needs it, and just basically turning to people and allowing them be a part of her life. For Julie, the journey that she goes on is kind of a journey of self-discovery. She's never really been certain of what her sexuality is. She's pretty sure she might not even have one. She goes through quite a lot of the book questioning whether she is asexual or not, whether she is demisexual or not. She's never really had any attraction to people until Elle has come along. They go through a very small fake dating phase where Elle takes Julie out to restaurants and takes her out to coffee shops and basically shows her what dating is like. And that's something that I really loved watching. It was kind of Pygmalion light, and I absolutely loved watching Julie kind of blossom, but also come to terms with who she was, discover who she really was, and to live authentically as who she was. Something else that was really great is that you do see the characters from the other books turning up here. London from Love and Other Disasters and Julie are twins, whereas Ben from Something Wild and Wonderful has been a childhood friend of Elle's for years and years, and they have such a great connection. But that connection looks like it's about to be slightly severed as Ben is about to move to the Pacific Northwest where he'd met Alexis in the second book. While it was great to see the updates from them, and while it was really nice to see what their lives were like, it felt a little bit like it was too much at times. There were some storylines that were very heavily dominated by London and Dahlia. There were some storylines that were a little bit too much of Ben and Alexis, and I think we just needed to tone it down a slight bit more. There were times that it almost took away from what Elle and Julie were doing, if they were even together, if they were in separate places than the others. I love seeing what other characters are doing. I love when companion novels feature the characters that you've known and met before, but I think it was just a little bit too heavily injected here. Those are all of the books that I read in May. I gave myself a little bit of a breather this month because I knew that June was coming and that the Amazing Readathon needed everything I could throw at it. But what was your favourite book that you read in May? Do leave me a comment below and let me know. If you'd love to leave me a comment but you can't think of anything you'd like to say, then why just leave me the stack of... If you'd love to leave me a comment but you can't think of anything you'd like to say, then just leave me the stack of books emoji. Don't forget to like and subscribe because I have new videos up every week. Now, get on out of here.